Most people think of sleep as something that simply happens when the lights go out. You get into bed, close your eyes, and eventually the brain switches off. But after 60, sleep often becomes less like flipping a switch and more like guiding a complicated machine into a quieter mode. And that raises an interesting question. Could something as ordinary as a spice have any influence on that process? The idea sounds almost too simple. Chew a small amount of a particular spice for about 60 seconds before bed, and perhaps your body settles down more easily. But before we accept that claim, we have to ask a more important question. Wes, what could possibly happen during those 60 seconds? When you chew a spice, you are not just tasting it. You are breaking its plant material apart and releasing chemical compounds into your saliva. Some of those compounds interact with taste receptors, smell receptors, and the digestive system. The aroma itself can also influence how the brain interprets the experience. In other words, the mouth is not an isolated room. It is connected to several biological systems that communicate with the brain. But this is where things become interesting, and where exaggerated health claims often begin. A spice may contain compounds with antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, or other biological activities in laboratory studies. Some compounds may also appear to influence pathways involved in relaxation or nervous system activity. But finding an interesting chemical effect in a laboratory is not the same thing as proving that chewing the spice before bed improves sleep in an older adult. That distinction matters. Imagine discovering that a key fits a lock. That tells you the key can interact with the lock. It does not tell you that turning the key will open the entire building. Sleep is that building. Your brain has to coordinate several systems at once. Your circadian rhythm, body temperature, hormones, nervous system activity, breathing, digestion, and environmental signals such as light and noise. After 60, these systems can become less tightly synchronized. Sleep may become lighter, nighttime awakenings may become more common, and the body's internal timing can shift. So perhaps the most useful way to think about a bedtime spice is not as a sleeping pill hidden inside your kitchen cabinet. Think of it as a small biological signal. The taste, smell, warmth, or digestive response may create a particular sensory experience at the same time every night, and routines themselves can become powerful cues. When the brain repeatedly experiences the same sequence, dim lights, quiet environment, bedtime routine, perhaps a familiar flavor, it can begin associating those signals with the approaching sleep period. But there is another possibility. Maybe the spice itself contributes very little. Maybe the benefit some people experience comes primarily from what surrounds the habit, slowing down, stopping stimulating activities, preparing the body for rest, and creating consistency. That is exactly why science requires patience here. A fascinating mechanism is not yet a proven treatment. So when someone says, chew this spice for 60 seconds and sleep better after 60, the scientifically honest response is not an immediate yes or no. It is, now let's investigate what actually happens. Because sometimes the most interesting discoveries are not hidden inside the spice itself. They are hidden in the relationship between a small daily habit, the nervous system, and the aging body. After 60, the body does not suddenly stop knowing how to sleep. What changes is the machinery that produces sleep. And this is an important distinction, because many people interpret lighter sleep as a failure of the body, when in reality, aging gradually changes the signals that control when, how deeply, and how continuously we sleep. Think of sleep as a carefully timed biological program. Your brain receives information about daylight, darkness, activity, meals, temperature, and countless other signals. It uses these clues to decide when the body should become alert and when it should begin winding down. One of the most important signals is melatonin. As evening darkness arrives, the brain normally increases melatonin production, helping communicate that nighttime has arrived. With aging, however, this system can become less pronounced or less consistent. The result is not necessarily insomnia, but the possibility of a weaker nighttime signal. There is another change that is easy to notice: sleep becomes more fragmented. A younger person may move through several stages of sleep with relatively long periods of uninterrupted rest. Older adults often spend more time in lighter stages of sleep and may experience more brief awakenings during the night. Sometimes these awakenings are so short that you do not remember them. Other times, you look at the clock and suddenly realize you have been awake for 20 minutes. Why does this happen? Part of the answer is that the brain's sleep architecture changes with age. Deep, slow, wave sleep tends to decrease. That means ordinary disturbances that might have been ignored earlier in life can become enough to pull the brain toward wakefulness. A noise outside, a room that is slightly too warm, the need to use the bathroom, a stressful thought, even an uncomfortable stomach. The body becomes more responsive to these signals because the boundary between light sleep and wakefulness can become easier to cross. Digestion can matter too. The digestive system changes with age, and late or heavy meals may become more noticeable at night. Reflux, bloating, or discomfort can interfere with the transition into sleep. This is one reason bedtime routines cannot be separated completely from what happens during the evening. And then there is the nervous system. Your body has systems designed to keep you alert and systems designed to help you recover. During the day, the alerting system helps you pay attention, move, react, and solve problems. At night, the body should gradually shift toward a calmer state. But modern life can keep the alerting system active long after the sun has gone down. Bright screens, worrying thoughts, stimulating conversations, caffeine, irregular schedules, and late-night activity can all send signals that say, stay awake. After 60, consistency may become especially valuable because the body's internal timing can become more sensitive to routine. This is where the idea of a simple bedtime ritual becomes interesting. If you perform the same calming sequence every night, your brain begins receiving predictable information. The day is ending, stimulation is decreasing, and sleep is approaching. A spice might become one small part of that signal. But it should not be confused with a switch that forces the brain into sleep. The bigger lesson is that better sleep after 60 is usually not about finding one magical ingredient. It is about understanding the changing biology of sleep and giving the body the conditions it needs to perform the process it already knows how to do. Now we reach the part where the story becomes more interesting. What is actually inside a spice that could possibly affect the body? When people hear that a particular spice may help with sleep, it is tempting to imagine a hidden sleeping compound sitting inside the plant, waiting to be released by chewing. Biology is rarely that simple. A spice is a mixture of many chemical compounds. Some give it its smell. Others create its flavor, warmth, bitterness, or tingling sensation. Some compounds act as antioxidants in laboratory experiments. Others may influence inflammation, digestion, or communication between cells. The question is whether any of these effects are strong enough and reliable enough to influence human sleep. This is where we need to separate three different levels of evidence. The first is what scientists observe in a laboratory. Researchers can isolate a compound from a plant and expose cells or biological systems to it. They may discover that the compound interacts with a particular pathway associated with inflammation, oxidative stress, or nervous system activity. That is interesting, but it does not automatically mean the same thing happens inside a sleeping human being. The second level is animal research. Scientists may give an extract or compound to an animal and observe changes in activity, stress responses, or sleep-related behavior. These experiments can help researchers understand possible biological mechanisms. But humans are not simply large laboratory animals. Our metabolism, sleep patterns, medications, health conditions, and daily environments are considerably more complicated. The third level is human research, and this is where the evidence matters most. If a spice truly improves sleep, researchers ideally want controlled studies involving people, with measurable outcomes such as how quickly participants fall asleep, how often they wake up, how long they remain asleep, and how rested they feel the next morning. And here we encounter an important problem. Evidence for many traditional spices and herbal remedies is often much weaker than the marketing suggests. You may see claims that a spice reduces stress, balances hormones, boosts melatonin, or activates the sleep center. Those phrases sound scientific, but they can hide enormous gaps between laboratory findings and real-world results. There is also the question of dose. A compound may produce an effect at a concentrated laboratory dose, that is impossible to obtain simply by chewing a small amount of the whole spice. The body must absorb the compound, transport it, metabolize it, and eventually remove it. Every step changes what actually reaches the tissues. And yet, this does not mean the entire idea is useless. Some spices contain biologically active compounds, and certain traditional bedtime practices may have plausible mechanisms worth investigating. The important thing is to keep the claim proportional to the evidence. If a spice helps someone relax as part of a consistent bedtime routine, that experience can be real. But it does not prove that the spice directly changes sleep architecture. This distinction protects us from two opposite mistakes. The first is believing every dramatic health claim. The second is dismissing every traditional practice simply because the evidence is incomplete. Science lies between those extremes. So the real question is not, is this spice a miracle sleeping remedy? The better question is, Alzars, what compounds does it contain, what can they realistically do in the human body, and what evidence shows that those effects actually improve sleep? Once we ask that question, the mystery becomes much more fascinating and much more honest. The number 60 sounds precise. Chew the spice for 60 seconds, swallow it, go to bed, and perhaps sleep will come more easily. It has the satisfying simplicity of a recipe, but biology does not always follow recipes. So why would 60 seconds matter? The first thing to understand is that chewing immediately changes the way a spice interacts with the body. Breaking the plant material apart releases aromatic oils and other compounds into the mouth. Taste receptors are activated. Smell molecules travel toward the olfactory system. Saliva begins mixing with the material, and the nervous system receives a burst of sensory information. But that does not mean 60 seconds is a magical biological countdown. There is no general scientific principle stating that every person over 60 must chew a particular spice for exactly 1 minute to trigger better sleep. If you hear that claim presented as a proven fact, it deserves skepticism. The number may simply represent a practical routine, long enough to release flavor and aroma, but short enough to be easy to repeat. And repetition may actually be more important than the stopwatch. The human brain is constantly learning associations. If you perform the same sequence every evening, turn off bright lights, slow down, prepare for bed, chew something familiar, and then lie down, the brain begins recognizing that sequence as a transition towards sleep. It is similar to hearing the opening notes of a familiar song. Before the song has even begun, your brain may already anticipate what comes next. A bedtime ritual can work in a comparable way. But we should also consider dosage. More is not automatically better. Increasing the amount of a spice does not necessarily increase a potential sleep effect. In fact, concentrated spices or extracts can sometimes irritate the mouth or stomach, interact with medications, or produce unwanted effects in sensitive people. This becomes particularly important after 60 because many older adults take medications regularly. The body also changes how it absorbs and processes substances with age. A natural product is still a chemical substance, and natural does not automatically mean harmless. Then there is another problem: expectation. Suppose someone believes a spice will help them sleep. They chew it before bed, relax, and fall asleep faster. Was the improvement caused by the spice? Maybe. But perhaps the person also stopped scrolling through their phone 10 minutes earlier. Maybe they went to bed at the same time every night. Maybe they simply expected the ritual to work and became less anxious about falling asleep. This is why controlled research is so important. Scientists try to separate the effect of the ingredient from the effect of expectation, routine, and coincidence. And there is a bigger lesson here. Sleep is not controlled by one switch. It is influenced by the circadian clock, light exposure, physical activity, stress, temperature, medications, caffeine, alcohol, pain, breathing, digestion, and many other factors. A 60-second habit cannot realistically override all of those systems, but it might become one small piece of a larger pattern. If chewing a familiar spice helps someone slow down, marks the end of the day, and becomes part of a calm and consistent bedtime routine, that may be useful, even if the spice itself turns out to have only a modest biological effect. So don't worship the 60 seconds. Use the 60 seconds as a question. What happens when you give your brain a predictable signal that the day is ending? That is a much more interesting scientific question than believing a kitchen spice contains a secret timer that switches sleep on after exactly 1 minute. The most useful lesson from all of this is surprisingly simple after 60. Better sleep is rarely about finding one magical ingredient. It is about creating the conditions that allow the body's natural sleep system to work with less interference. A spice may become part of that process, but it should be viewed as a small experiment rather than a guaranteed treatment. Think about what happens during the final hour before bed. If the brain has been exposed to bright screens, stressful conversations, work, news, heavy meals, and constant stimulation, suddenly lying down does not instantly erase all of those signals. The body may be physically tired, while the brain is still behaving as though it needs to remain alert. A better approach is to gradually reduce stimulation. Dim the lights. Put away stimulating screens. Keep the bedroom comfortable and quiet. Follow a reasonably consistent bedtime. Give your body time to transition rather than demanding that it fall asleep immediately. Then consider the spice. If you enjoy it and it is safe for you, it can become part of a predictable evening ritual. The important point is not to treat the spice like medication. You are creating a cue. This is the moment when the day begins to slow down. And consistency matters. If you perform the same calming routine at approximately the same time each night, the brain begins to recognize the pattern. Over time, those repeated signals can become associated with sleep. The routine itself may become easier and more automatic. But there is an important safety boundary. If you take prescription medicines, have significant digestive problems, have allergies, or are considering concentrated spice supplements or extracts, do not assume that a natural product is automatically safe. Whole spices used in ordinary food amounts are different from concentrated supplements. And if sleep problems are persistent, severe, or accompanied by loud snoring, gasping, significant daytime sleepiness, or frequent nighttime urination, the answer may not be sitting in the kitchen. Sometimes poor sleep is a symptom rather than the primary problem. Breathing disorders, medication effects, anxiety, pain, reflux, urinary problems, and other conditions can disturb sleep. In those situations, masking the problem with a bedtime ritual may delay finding the real cause. There is also something else worth remembering. Don't judge a sleep strategy by one night. Sleep naturally varies. You can follow the perfect routine and still have a bad night. That does not necessarily mean the routine failed. Instead, look for patterns over time. Are you falling asleep more comfortably? Are nighttime awakenings becoming less disruptive? Do you feel more refreshed in the morning? Is your bedtime becoming more predictable? Those are more meaningful questions than whether you slept perfectly last night. And perhaps that is the most important message for anyone over 60. Your body is not broken simply because your sleep has changed. Aging changes the sleep system, but it does not eliminate your ability to improve your sleep environment, habits, and routines. The spice is only one small piece of the puzzle. The larger strategy is to respect the biology of sleep, give your brain darkness, give your body consistency, reduce stimulation, stay physically active during the day, be thoughtful about evening food and caffeine, and investigate persistent problems instead of accepting them as just aging. If a simple 60-second spice ritual fits comfortably into that routine, fine. But don't give the spice all the credit. The real power may come from something much less mysterious. Azale's teaching your body, night after night, that it is safe to slow down.